This is Toby Wright, and you're listening to Discography Discussion.
You wouldn't believe it, but there is a child 8 feet from me right now watching Nightmare Before Christmas. So we're going to try not to get our misery signals crossed.
I was hoping for more of a misery index as to how long this conversation was going to last.
Oh, man, that would be great. That's the better line. Dude, I was standing right next to Rug Cogdell's amp, and he was turned up so much louder than he should have been that, like, every time he started doing any of his, like, really weird, like, high-pitched screeches and stuff on his guitar, it was like I can still feel it. It's, like, inside my ear, like somebody shoved a giant pointy finger right down my ear. So, I mean, I went and saw Zao in Indy, which I've been gushing about for weeks, but, like, it hasn't really been weeks, but more like days.
When this posts, it will.
Yeah, it feels like weeks ago, but anyway.
And if you've been gushing about seeing Zao for days, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe, that is Dan, that is Jon Beatty of Jons Untitled podcast. And we're talking about Misery Signal because somebody wanted me to listen to this band today.
Signals, there's more than one.
Oh, more than one. So this is like that movie, like Contact?
I haven't thought about Contact in years.
That's a great movie. Not really.
It's not. It's very
terrible
uneventful.
Movie. It's an entire movie about, you're an alien and your dad was an alien and you're not going to remember any of this.
I thought that was the thing. Isn't that what everyone was trying to convince each other that they weren't?
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you have 20 minutes of static and you're trying to convince everyone that this thing didn't happen, I mean, you could have just had a bad tape, just saying.
Yeah, that's possible. But
no, those are the Ring movies. They're the bad tapes.
Don't watch those tapes by yourself in a room and then answer the phone.
Is the bad tape like the bad touch?
If you watch the tape and don't answer the phone, are you still going to die?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think they proved that because I think that's what the child did or something.
All right, so let's jump on this horse.
Stop beating the dead one that we're on right now.
I got stuff to do, man.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Go ahead, Dan. Tell us about seeing Zao in Indianapolis.
Okay, so I saw Zao in Indianapolis 2 days ago. My ears are still very much ringing from that experience. As I said multiple times, Zao is better now than they have ever been. Because before, I've seen Zao probably, 800-900 times. And I have to say that this was their most elaborate stage show that I've seen. They were playing sound clips. They had a smoke. I don't know if they had a smoke machine or not. That might have been the Atlas Moth. There was a lot. It was pretty hazy in there, by the time Zao came on.
It could have just been the overwhelming man smell, just hazing the entire room.
Oh, there was definitely some overwhelming man smell going on there. But yeah, it was definitely their best. They were playing all the sound clips from the albums and just doing all the intros to the actual songs, because like every time I've seen them before, they kind of just get up there like very punk rock style, play all their songs, and then they get off the stage. And this time it seemed more like an actual like the headlining band production, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen Zao and I've only seen them play a 25-minute set, or like in support of whatever. And now they're at a point where they're headlining all their own shows, and it's starting to show. Like they're getting that headlining band production together, and I think it's pretty sweet. I think it works really well on them.
Well, in response to the stars that are Zao, can we talk about Misery Signals now?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Before we talk about Misery Signals, I want to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We're on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, so if you have an Amazon Echo or a Google Home, you have no excuse. Ask it to play the latest episode of the Discography Discussion podcast, and it will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at Discuss Metal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening, and now Dan is going to tell us all about 5-star reviews.
We love 5-star reviews here on Discography Discussion. We love them because it makes us feel nice inside. Occasionally I'll read a 5-star review when I'm having a bad day, and I'll shed a teeny tiny small tear in response to it. But in all seriousness, we just want reviews because reviews help us get recommended to other people that might be interested in a podcast like ours. So rating, reviewing, subscribing is literally the greatest free option that we have available to you, and it helps us out immensely, and we thank you very much.
And now Jon is going to tell us all about Jons Untitled podcast.
Well, as the third-time guest on this podcast, and having one of your hosts, Daniel Terry, as my co-host, it's a little bit incestuous over here, but Daniel and I, we talked to a bunch of different musicians and so forth, and are trying to actually expand a little more into things outside of the musical realm. Recently, we are going to be posting an episode with Johnny McBee from the Browning. As soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to talk to Vincent from the Acacia strain.
Oh, yeah.
And Dan's going to be doing a Zao interview. Surprise, surprise, I know. Wait for the applause. But it'll be Dan doing an interview on my podcast, our podcast. I think we're legally married now.
Yeah, we definitely are. I mean, I think it's like one of those, what's the rule if you like live with someone for more than 48 hours, married? You're married, common law marriage.
I think Joe and I are brother husbands or whatever it would be instead of sister wives at this point.
Well, I mean, if you take the Azalea Dying episode just by itself for discography discussion, we passed the common law marriage rule anyway, just in that one episode. So you're also married to Jeff.
Oh, well, more brother husbands, I guess. And anyway, though, on the podcast, we go over and do a lot of this. We bullshit back and forth and make really awkward jokes that don't land typically between anyone other than ourselves. And I got to say, having Dan on lately has been really fun. And I want to say thanks for, again, having me on this podcast. But if you would like to follow all things our podcast, you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, all the platforms Joe already mentioned, Jons Untitled podcast. Go check things out and subscribe if you're so inclined.
Hey, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. 5-star reviews, all that stuff I said about discography discussion. Same very much applies with Jons Untitled podcast. So, you know.
That's the whole reason I brought Dan on, was just so he could spout the well-rehearsed 5-star rating thing that I'm no good at doing.
Yeah. You know what band really gets me in touch with my feelings? Misery Signals.
Preach.
Tell me about Misery Signals, Dan.
Oh, man. So Misery Signal is they're a metalcore band. I was going to say a Canadian metalcore band, but it's a little bit...
it's Midwest, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's a Wisconsin thing. You know what I mean? So, as you all know, I love melodic hardcore. I love melodic metalcore. I like melodic music. I like pretty harsh music. Not like pretty harsh music, bro, but like pretty harsh music. And Misery Signals is absolutely that in every sense of the word. And really, I probably got into Misery Signals about, I would say probably with the release of Mirrors in 2006. And I thought that was an amazing record, and then I went back to Of Malice and the Magnum Heart and just completely fell in love, because as a music commentator, I've just got way too much I've got a little too much of the first album's the best in me. So they've had a very interesting journey as a band.
Yeah, I can't speak for Joe, but I very much echo Dan's sentiments. I came into the band on Mirrors and was really blown away. A friend of mine showed me Something Was Always Missing, But It Was Never You, and just fell in love with the juxtaposition of the melody versus the kind of breakdown, off-time riffs and stuff. And around that time of the early to mid 2000s, there was a lot of that odd kind of syncopated guitar drum stuff going on. Gojira was out. Obviously Meshuggah, not Meshuggah as you guys say, drives my wife nuts. And it's one of those things where my friend showed me this. I went back, listened to Of Malice and the Magnum Heart, and honestly, I wasn't really a fan of this. I liked the music, but I was not really a fan of Jesse's vocals at first. And I know we're kind of jumping ahead slightly, even though it's the exact same album, but it really wasn't until the Rain City sessions of them having Jesse back on the Of Malice 10-year tour, seeing them perform those songs live, and just the energy that a band 10 years after the fact still playing these songs and what they meant to Jesse, that I really started to be able to go back and listen to Of Malice and the Magnum Heart and really appreciate it for its rawness all the way across the board.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I love about that record, is it's just pure passion from beginning to end. And it really, and that's what grabbed me more than anything. Any band can make a complete, well, not any band, but a lot of bands can make a completely, technically proficient album. that checks all the right boxes, and they very much did that. Like, I mean, like 2004, what was that? 03, 04 of Malice, and yeah, and you know, it's not that it's not a technically proficient record, or that they don't try a couple of things. I mean, some of those breakdowns really hit, man, like really hard. But the weird thing about it is that, like, that passion, like that. I hate to bring Hopesfall into it, but like almost that Hopesfall air of like atmosphere that was present throughout, and you've just got this mix of just. Personally, I'm Team Jesse as far as vocals go for Misery Signals. I think Carl is incredible, but I like Jesse because he just has a little bit more of that passionate edge to him. And it's kind of like a Josh Scogin, Corey Brandon type of situation for me, because Josh Scogin's like the one that got away, and Corey Brandon's like the girl you end up marrying. You know what I mean? Like, there's pros and cons there.
So you're saying if the girl you marry puts out a record called Polar Similar, that's a bad thing?
I didn't say it was a bad thing at all. I mean, obviously, you end up with the girl that you married, right? Or guy. Well, you know, it's. I like, what I'm trying to say is I like Jesse more than Carl, but not because I think Jesse is better than Carl. Does that make sense?
It does, but can I add, you know, it's interesting you bring up Josh with Norma Jean and the Chariot and so forth. So, I mean, a very easily common theme between those two is they both did a record and then left. So is it more of you only had that one thing, so instead of like, you know, a Carl, or even if we can say Jesse from Killswitch, you only had a very finite amount of work to where when that record came out, you're like, wow, I really love this record and how raw and impassioned it is. But they didn't stick around to do, you know, a bad record like Howard ended up doing on that first self-titled Killswitch record. Is that a fair assessment too? So like maybe you didn't get to wear out of Jesse from Misery Signals?
Yes and no. I think with the bands you mentioned, like Killswitch and with Norma Jean and Chariot, all that stuff, I think that was true, because like the first thing I heard from Norma Jean was Bless the Martyr, Kiss the Child. First thing I heard, technically I heard Throwing Myself by Ludacris first, but that's a whole different thing. But you know, and with Killswitch Engage, you know, Live or Just Breathing was my first experience. Like I said earlier, the first album I heard by Misery Signals was Mirrors. So
right.
I heard Carl first, and I thought he was great. But then I went back and I listened to Jesse on Malice of the Magnum Heart, and I'm like, this guy's got it a little bit more in the passion department. A little bit more. Carl is a great metalcore screaming vocalist, almost has a deathcore vibe to him. Like, he could easily go and join a deathcore band and sound amazing. But Jesse's more on the hardcore side for me. It's almost like the difference between a more hardcore oriented and a more metal vocalist.
That's the big comparison that I see from this band and a band like Norma Jean. You can tell the origin of this band was some form of chaotic hardcore. They do that 2004, 2005, 2006 syncopated counting metal thing that some people have called mathcore. It's not. Randomly changing or seemingly random changing time signatures. And a lot of bands did that in an effort to seem more complicated than they were, whereas a band like Between the Buried and Me appears to write the song that way. It was anti-pop, which was a great record by Primus, in that you couldn't really pull a hook out of it. This band actually kind of used hooks to keep you interested in the chaos they were creating.
I think a thing of note, too, that should be kind of mentioned is the fact that this record came out of, and the band really, I guess, too, came out of a huge tragedy that basically became and sparked a lot of the lyrical content and driving force behind this record, which was Jesse's old band and bandmates passing away after having a van accident. And I think obviously that speaks to the very impassioned vocals and all that kind of stuff that makes it a lot easier for anybody who's experienced any kind of loss to really understand when you listen to this record. There's a lot of ache and a lot of regret and just all the things, you know, the what is it, the 12 or the five steps of grief basically kind of being played out on this record.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what grabbed me. It's kind of weird too, right? Because like how we're attracted to tragedy in a certain sense. Not that we're attracted to it, but like, you know, it's not that we want bad things to happen, but the type of art that people are able to produce as a result of these tragic events Yeah, I mean, to me, Of Malice in the Magnum Heart is absolutely like a landmark record for the genre. Like, I'm a very big fan of that record, and I don't want to undersell that in any way.
Is Misery Signals a band that other artists would claim as an influence?
I think what Misery Signals, and sorry to cut Dan off, I think what Misery Signals and this record particularly is one of those bands that's something Dan and I talk about, and I think you guys talk about quite a bit too, is one of those bands that's at the forefront that a lot of bands know of but never gets, not necessarily the credit, people don't know who they are because for whatever reason, like I think if you go around it's almost like Blood Has Been Shed. To me, Blood Has Been Shed was a very landmark band for a myriad of genres that came out of heavy music, whether it be deathcore or technical metal or, the odd time signature kind of thing, using super low, like down-tuned guitars and so forth. But the difference is, a lot of people are willing to give Blood Has Been Shed more credibility, I think, because of how big Howard and Justin became in Killswitch, whereas none of these guys, sadly, have really become super successful to where there's more of a light shown onto this band. But I think they are very much a band's band. Anyone who plays or listens to this style of music, you can't help but go back and say, man, Of Malice in the Magnum Heart, or man, Controller, or man, Mirrors. Like, Misery Signals is that band. I just don't think they are on that level that they are an influence in a very obvious sense.
They're not I like that term, a band's band, because they very much are that. People that know what they're talking about are Misery Signals fans. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those, like, like you said, John, they really are a band that are more of a embodiment of the style of music that they play, and it's not a compromise. Like, that record wasn't written to get fans necessarily.
No.
Like, not any more than like any band obviously tries to get fans, but like, I mean, like, there's no, like, this is 2004. It could have been very easy to throw on some Bullet for My Valentine type choruses, and like just the stuff that all the kids with their bright pink hair highlights and stuff are gonna come to your show and be like, oh, they're so cool, and he's got such a beautiful voice, and there's nothing beautiful about Of Malice in the Magnum Heart in the sense of, like, from a pop sensibility. It is a dirty, dingy metalcore record that sounds beautiful musically. And I feel a band that I actually really wasn't that big of a fan of, that they remind me of, is For the Fallen Dreams. Like, I was not into that band. Like, I didn't know anything about them. I had a couple of their CDs and just literally never played them because they were sitting in a stack of like 1,000 CDs, And but it's kind of that same thing where because it's easy to go like the Hopes Fall route whenever you're like you get pinned as a melodic band. Like, it's easy to go the Hopes Fall route and just literally just drift off into space and just do all this really ethereal stuff. But what I like about Misery Signals is how they kept it heavy, they kept it brutal, like actually pretty brutal in places, but still had all that same energy and emotion and atmosphere as a Hopes Fall. And they really kept it together on that first record in a way that I just, it just blows me away. And unfortunately, though, if you're listening to it and you don't get it, like all you hear is breakdowns and screaming, and you're waiting for the chorus to kick in, you're listening to the wrong band. And it's not to say that their songs didn't have hooks, like Joe said, and their stuff is super hooky, but it's not like pop hooky, I guess, if that makes sense.
It's not as obvious.
It's got that Beatles chorus thing when they did like the Benefit for Mr. Kite, and they took this piece of music and cut it up, threw it on the floor, taped it back together, and then just played that in the background. To the normal metalcore listener who's looking for a chorus, this might feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, but I mean, a lot of the metalcore bands from that time period, between like 04 and 06, they were doubling down pretty hard on those choruses.
Oh, yeah. I was listening to a bunch of Haste the Day earlier today, and I was like, Jesus Christ. This, like, the progression of, like, just a song like Blue 42 has every staple of what became, like, that sound of the, like, early to mid 2000s metalcore.
Haste the Day was a sure thing every time. Yeah. Just like vanilla ice cream, man. But I kind of feel the same way about Misery Signals to an extent. It's always been a sure thing. And to move past, because I mean we've slobbered all over Mouse and the Magnum Heart enough. I think.
Before you do, I want to make one comment because I'm going to bring this back when we get to Controller.
One more slobber.
Yep, one more slobber. So basically, the thing, and if anyone who has listened to the podcast I do with Dan on our show, or even anytime I've been on this podcast, I'm a big stickler for production and stuff like that. And something that's, I think of note is that Devin Townsend produced this record, and I think that's why a lot of the interesting things sonically that are on this record, I couldn't have thought of another producer who probably could have brought this out of this band. And to me, I think, especially once we get to Controller, I'm going to bring that up again. But I just want to put a pin in here that I think Devin Townsend's production on this is why this record sounds like it does, which will now lead us into their second record, Mirrors. And holy shit, did a lot of things change.
Yeah, well, I mean, number one, lead vocal's gone. Interesting thing about that, about how they got Carl, was they just did a contest.
MySpace.
Literally a MySpace contest. We need a vocalist. You guys all know we're like the greatest band ever, so you're gonna want to try out for this band. He sent them a tape. They loved it. I didn't send them a tape. I should have sent them a tape.
How many tapes have you sent over the years?
I've sent a few tapes.
What Christian and or metalcore bands that were of some prominence at this time have you sent tapes for? Because at this point, let's...
Haste the Day, Bloodline Calligraphy, actually, who had a female vocalist.
I played with them.
We played with them before too. Our old band did, and I sent them a tape, and then they just hired another female vocalist. I mean, I get it from a looks perspective.
As
100%.
opposed to this female vocalist.
Correct. So, let's see. There was Bloodline Calligraphy. I think Nodes of Ranvier. I sent them a tape when they had a vocalist switch. And they actually had multiple vocalist switch, but I only sent one tape. Again, had it been a sure thing. But whatever. I think Carl was a good match for Misery Signals, especially with the way Mirrors sounds. I didn't know if Mirrors would have sounded like that regardless of him, like even if it had still been Jesse. I don't know if Mirrors would have sounded the same. Would it have sounded the same musically, just and vocally? I'm not sure. It's hard to kind of make that call because there's so many factors that go into a change like this. But I mean, man. Sorry. This record is just so different, but still really consistent. I don't know really how to explain it in a way that makes actual sense when I say it's very different, but very much this. The expectations were all met, I guess, 100%. But it was a record that had its own identity.
I think a good comparison would be, as was said earlier, Norma Jean. The first time I listened to Mirrors after listening to the last record, I was reminded the first time I listened to Oh God, the Aftermath after listening to Bless the Martyr. It sounded the same, but it didn't sound as good to me. The expectations were met, but it was different. It was a different thing, but it wasn't so drastically different that I'm sitting here asking, why didn't you guys just change the name? So did they successfully transition into a new frontman better than most mainstream acts would?
Yes.
Well said, sir.
I'm kind of torn because I think the thing for me on this is, obviously, as Dan and I already said, this is the record that Dan and I got into this band on. So it's a little hard to sit there and say anything contrary to me going, well, this is where I found the band initially. With that being said, in going back, I don't feel like there's as much raw aggression and that energy that was on the first record. Part of me doesn't know if that's because of a different vocalist, which, I mean, again, I'm going to go back to Killswitch because this is all happening around the same time. And I guess we can even use Norma Jean as an example, too, because those are three bands that are all having kind of an identity crisis, sort of having to find a new frontman on a seminal record that, broke the band. But I think Carl is able to do well with what they were doing, like as far as if you ever saw them live around this time, he was able to do the old songs really well because he was a fan. And he sounded good, but he added completely different kind of tone, whereas I feel like Jesse, sort of like Dan was saying, is more of a, I guess I'll say it more like a normal hardcore vocalist, if that makes sense. Carl, I feel like, has more range within what he does, and it's not fully on display here yet, but I think he allows the band to kind of play off of the dynamics that they're so good at creating within their music with his vocals. And I think a great example of that is the Failsafe. I mean, I can't think of another song. I mean, there are songs on of Malice and the Magnum Heart that have kind of that chorus, as Joe was kind of alluding to, but I think the Failsafe is more, and even, you know, something was always missing, and even One Day I'll Stay Home. Those are great examples of where there's more melody and an emphasis on almost more of a hook that you didn't see on the first record.
I think overall, I just get a little bit more of a mechanical feel off of this record, and sometimes the more mechanical you get, the less emotional you come across. You know, it's kind of like how I wouldn't consider Meshuggah to be an emotional band, like, at all. I think I said they sound like robots playing music.
I think that's just catharsis in musical form.
Yeah, that's a band. Anyway. I got so tired of talking about Meshuggah in the middle of that conversation that I was like, all right, guys, final thoughts. And they're like, you've got 2 albums left. And I'm like, oh, that's right.
Well, Dan, you've got 2 more records to go with this band.
I think we're going to be fine with Misery Signals. Or should I find a different, I should start calling them like Missouri Signals.
Missouri Signals.
Just change it up a little bit just to irritate people. Actually, until you said that, I had no idea. I've been saying it wrong. I thought the band's name was pronounced Meshuggah.
I mean, it may be, like, and maybe that's just a geographical thing, but, like, when I was listening to that episode, my wife was like, why the fuck do they keep saying Meshuggah like it's Meshuggah? And I was like, that's how I've always heard it, but I don't know, different dialects, I guess, in different areas, so that's whatever.
Well, we'll come back to it at the end of the discussion, and I'll pull up the actual pronunciation key for it and see what we get. Anyway.
Final thoughts on Meshuggah.
Right, yeah. No, I don't know, man. Like, I guess for me, it just came across as a little bit more mechanical. And again, this was the first Misery Signals album that I heard. So the first time I heard it, I was like, this is great. You know, this is amazing, you know, because it's all still here, man. The brutality is here. I will say that the aggression is stepped back like half a step.
Yeah.
It's not. And again, that's all just passion, you know, like, I think that can just be chalked up to, like, you know, it's our second record. Nobody's as angry on their second record as they are on their first record. Usually, some bands notwithstanding, but I think that they are really in the pocket here. I think for a sophomore release, there's nothing wrong. Like, I mean, you can't beat songs like Something Was Always Missing. You just can't. Like,
no. I mean, that's basically as close to a hit in the genre as you can possibly get.
Absolutely, and that's the whole thing with Misery Signals overall as a band, is that they are very much in the genre, but they're not necessarily like they're never going to turn into like a Fall Out Boy, or, you know, like, they're never going to change so significantly that they're never going to that they're going to ever be unrecognizable to fans, like a lot of bands are, you know, like an Under Oath, or, you know, something like that. Like, you know, like I said about Haste Today is also very true of Misery Signals. It's a sure thing. You know, when you buy their albums, you already know you are in for an experience that's going to be similar to the experience you had before, but a little bit different. And that is the magical formula for any band, regardless of genre. You know, our brains are, you know, like those little chemicals in our brains that are activated whenever we're happy, or whenever we hear something familiar. That's why, you know, people complain that, like, pop music all sounds the same. Well, yeah, it sounds the same because they're trying to elicit that familiar feeling that you get in your brain, but you have to change it up just enough for it to be unique and also stick as its own thing. Now, with Misery Signals, if you started with the first album and you transitioned into this one, it's a very easy transition for you, but it is still like an evolution of a band. So there's some things I think that they did better from a genre perspective on Mirrors that on Malice and the Magnum Heart was I don't want to say more sloppy, that's not the right word, but just it was more like the emotion takes precedence over the technical proficiency, whereas Mirrors is kind of the opposite of that.
I sometimes wonder, and that's why I kind of wanted to hit on the fact that Devin Townsend had produced the first record, was Devin's kind of known for, I mean, a great example looking at the record he did with Lamb of God, you know, he's known for letting players play and kind of letting some of the, if you've ever listened to anything Devin Townsend's been associated with that he's written or whatever, like, dude is very stickler for crisp, clean production, making sure everything's tight and exactly as it needs to be. However, I think from him as a producer working with other bands, something that seems to really be interesting about that is that some of the bands that he's worked with, he kind of lets the sloppiness kind of let it in, because that's what adds the character to the music that's being played. And I've always thought, you know, looking back, and especially once we get to Controller, like I said, that's something that you can't help but notice, is just the raw, I don't want to say youthful aggression, but just the impassioned aggression that has a purpose, and it's guiding that whole first record. This one has an intensity about it, but I think instead of it being matched lyrically, vocally, and everything like that, I think it just kind of takes a backseat to sort of a lack of production on this one. Like, it kind of takes the balls away from it a little bit.
Yeah, and you can blame all that on the production side of it, really, because you go and see this band live, and these songs are going to stand, nose to nose with each other.
Oh, for sure.
In a live setting, because I mean, I've seen Carl play almost everything off of a Mouse and the Magnum Heart, and it'd be just as intense as it ever was, or and even has that passion, even though he's not necessarily talking about something he was involved in,
Yeah.
And that's a
tall order
performance, Anyway, but to jump further into Controller.
Ooh, 2008.
Oh,
this is my favorite
goodness.
fucking record of this band's, hands down.
This is a powerhouse.
This is a motherfucker of an album.
This is kind of the realization of the dream, or full realization of the idea. When you start a band, you're not entirely sure how it's going to turn out. You know what I mean? You're gonna get everybody together. They're all gonna bring what they have to the table, but at the end of the day, there's really no way of predicting how it's going to sound. This is almost the exact blueprint of when everyone sat down and said, we're going to start a band that's going to sound like this. This is that record. It took them 2 records to get there. And that's not even taking anything away from the first 2 releases. They were phenomenal. This is phenomenal plus 7.
The bad parts of the chaos are missing. Notice I said the bad parts. The parts where you're building an idea and then you just move on to the next thing too early. Or you take an idea and drag it on too long. This kind of moves into, I will not call it generic metalcore because it doesn't sound like Killswitch Engage, but you can see what this band had before. This is, all right, guys, let's sit down. Let's actually do this the best we possibly can, because clearly we know how to write a good metal riff.
It's hard to really put it into words, but it's like, I think we all know there's a difference between writing good metalcore songs and writing good songs. Especially like some of the really early metalcore, like the pre-2004 material. Play this riff, then play this riff, then play breakdown, and then play this riff, and then play breakdown, and then play this riff, and then next song. That was like, metalcore was more just like, how many cool, weird ideas can we throw into this mix? And Misery Signals kind of did that a little bit on their first 2 releases, because they were kind of more of the old school metalcore sound. And this record was, in my opinion, the first time that they really crafted real songs that you could remember a lot better, like without having to listen to the record a million times. And I just found their actual songwriting skill to be far superior to the first 2 records.
This is definitely a case where I wonder, and I should have mentioned it when we were talking about Mirrors, but this is a case where I wonder if the time frame of Jesse leaving the band to finding Carl to, I don't know the touring history at that point, but I don't know if that's like a thing where the label was like, all right, time to write a new record. It's not like Howard, who came in during Alive or Just Breathing, had to perform those songs, kind of got a better feel for the band, and what they were doing, and then slowly got integrated into the writing process of the next record, where Carl may have just come straight up and it's like, here's a new record, just write shit to this and here you go. And there wasn't really that honeymoon phase of trying to figure out where he felt comfortable being himself. And to me, when we get to Controller, this is the band firing on all cylinders, because those dudes are great, as we've said a million times already, and have been playing with each other for a long time. But now you've got Carl, who's been in the band for a few years, got a record under his belt, and now feels probably more comfortable in his own skin to be who he wants to be in this band. And to me, it shows right out the gate with Nothing. I mean, Jesus Christ, like lyrically, like that song is, I mean, this whole album, like the album cover, the lyrical content of this whole record, I can't think of a piece of music that just so encapsulates itself, like one goes so well into the next. Like the album cover gives you an idea of what you're about to get when you get it. It's dark, it's dreary, it's heavy, it's everything that album cover looks like it is. And it does take control of you when you're listening to it from start to finish, because you can't help but be engrossed throughout the whole process of listening to it. Like anytime I throw this record on, I might have an idea of like, yeah, I want to listen to like Weight of the World. But then I'm like, oh, fuck, let's start at the beginning. And then next thing I know, like I'm already at the end of the record, and I'm like, shit. All right, well, fucking start it again, man.
It's 40. Yeah, I mean, 40 minutes. It's a good length, Yeah. It definitely isn't a huge time investment for you, and you're gonna have a great time for 40 minutes. And it's hard. It's really hard to objectively talk about a record this good, because my recommendation is pop it in, listen to the whole thing.
Yeah,
that's it.
That's pretty much it.
I mean, yeah, sure, there's standout tracks. I like Coma. I like Set in Motion. I like Reset. I like it all. I like it all.
I started to go, well, I mean, like, I think I started to be like, all right, well, the first 10 songs. I mean,
right.
it's all good. Like, it's like I said, and I think that's something kind of speaking to what both of you have been saying about this, the little bit we've been talking about this, is the fact that they wrote a full record. I think the track listing really helped. I think they focused on everything that matters. This is something Dan and I talk about when talking, in general, just to each other. And I think you guys have all talked about throughout this whole discography discussion podcast, is what separates good albums from great albums is the fact that the track listing, they pay attention to all those things. So they have strong songs, and it's not like it's not front loaded, it's not back loaded, or the middle two songs could have been, didn't need those. It's like there's kind of knowing what you do well, hitting the mark and getting out before you have time to like fuck it up. And it's like, to me, this is just a record that knows what it needed to do, came in, delivered, and it's like, leave you wanting more. We did it.
And Devin Townshend.
And Devin Township. He did a great job.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Township of Devon. The mayor, Jon Beatty.
That's Mayor McCheese.
Did you just call me?
I think Devin Townsend coming in on this too. Like that, I think it can't be understated enough. Like sonically, like two of my two favorite records are of Malice and the Magnum Heart and Controller. It's kind of interesting when you look at it that the same dude produced it. So it's like, okay, that's the winning formula. Apparently you need Devin Townsend to get in a room with these guys and magic fucking happens. He's able to bring out the best in what they can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to me, like I actually compare this record a lot to not musically, but it's kind of like a Linkin Park Hybrid Theory type of situation where every track is good.
Oh, okay.
Every track's a winner. And that really typically doesn't exist in metalcore. It doesn't, because like even on some of the best records you've ever heard, best metalcore records you've ever heard, Shadows of Security, eventually you're going to start complaining that whole record sounds the same. People are going to be like, yeah, but it's a good sound, so it's all good. But see, now you're justifying. You don't have to justify anything on Controller. It is every single song's a banger, pretty much. I don't know. I keep going around in circles with it because I love the record. And I like, if this had been their last record, I'd been like, it's a great band. It's a holy trilogy of albums.
The one time this week I didn't want to listen to Controller, I listened to something that wasn't metalcore. And then I went back and listened to Controller again, and I said, okay, it doesn't run together. It's not generic. It's not an As I Lay Dying ripoff session. I literally just didn't want to listen to metalcore right then. And that's my review of that record. It is a great album, but if you listen to it and all you hear is the same thing just over and over and over, you probably don't want to listen to metalcore right now. Come back later when you do want to listen to metalcore.
The interesting thing around this point, and the only reason I'm going to bring this up is because I think it actually has some relevance to the 5-year gap we had between records. The members out, even Carl, basically the band started kind of doing a lot of side projects. You had Stu and Brandon doing Low Talker with some of the dudes in Comeback Kid, a little bit of foreshadowing there. You end up having Burning Empires, which has got Matt Mixon from Seven Angels, Seven Plagues, which some of the dudes were in, and some of the Misery Signals guys. Carl obviously went off and did Solace, which, more or less sounded a lot like this Misery Signal stuff. And there was just an absence, no pun intended for the next upcoming album, but there was an absence of the band. They were touring somewhat, but they just kind of seemed to fall away, and none of the other bands outside of Solace sounded anything like this. So it was kind of almost seemingly like, well, I guess that's it. This band's kind of slowly fading away because they weren't doing anything. And then we get 2013's Absent Light. And before we got that, though, we get a crowdfunding campaign.
Yep, because, was the season. Really the 2010s, every band. We're crowdfunding, we're crowdfunding it all, and which is really weird, right? Like, maybe it's not weird, but like, do you think that they really would have had a problem putting this out without it?
Well, here's the thing too. This is right around the time I think Ferret went under or got bought out by whoever they got bought out by. So I don't think they.
Yeah, Warner Brothers, I think it was.
Yeah, I don't, and I might be wrong. I know there's like a little mini documentary on this that Matt did. I feel like this was, maybe the label didn't want to fund a record in the truest sense, like give them the money they maybe needed to make the record they wanted to make.
Correct.
And so this was a way to see if the fans that they had, who are a very loyal bunch, would fund it. And they did. They met their goal. They obviously made the record. I think, they had some sweet perks, and I know some people got to come out in the documentary, you saw that fans got to come out and see the record being performed and recorded and so forth, and got to hear it. Somewhere along the process of Controller and making of this record, we lost Greg and Kyle.
Yes.
The guitar player and the bass player. Greg Stu. Stu went over to Comeback Kid, and Kyle ended up just leaving. And then we get Greg Thomas from ex-Shai Hulud, handful of other bands in his own recording studio. And seeing him live playing all the old stuff was great. Greg is a phenomenal guitar player and killed it in that role. But there's just kind of something missing, no pun intended again. And then we finally get this record. And for me, I don't know if it's how long it took to get it, but there just seemed to be a disconnect. There always has been a disconnect for me with this record. I don't really feel like it fits in with the rest of the records. And
do you remember how I was saying how easy it is for bands like this to go the Hopes Fall route and just get so kind of atmospheric and out there and artsy fartsy, kind of, so to speak? And I don't think that's a problem most of the time, but I don't feel like Misery Signals was ever building towards this. You understand? Like, they weren't. This was not like a few weeks ago. You talked to Siler, and they were talking about how they didn't end up where they started, but you could see the breadcrumb trail along the way of where you're going to go.
Right.
And I feel like that's very much this record. I mean, and I like Absent Light because I'm a fan of melodic metalcore, and it very much is that, but it's a little bit too focused. I think it's focused a little bit too much on the atmosphere, the melody, and they're trying to create a feeling that, like, I just don't care about at this point in their career anymore, because, like, if I want passion, I'm going to listen to the first record. If I want a little bit more technical proficiency, I'm going to listen to the second record. I'm probably just going to listen to Controller anyway, before any of it. But it's one of those, like, really, like, I just don't feel like the heavy parts really hit on Absent Light like they have in the past. Maybe they sound better live, but like the breakdowns don't beat me down like they should. there's just all that dissonant riffing that I've heard from other melodic metalcore bands so many years before. And it's not even that it's generic, it's its own thing, but there's just nothing super compelling about it. And I just can't get into it like I could the other records. Like, it is a good record, but it's not like, oh my God, check this out. Like, I'm not recommending this to people. And it's not that anybody's done anything wrong. They probably did as good as they could based on the circumstances, but I just don't feel like it's got that Misery Signals stamp on it, you know, because I don't think they're unrecognizable here, you know, but it's definitely like, this is the kind of thing I would have expected out of like their second record. This would seem like a cash grab if it had come out years prior. Like, listen, hey, we're going more melodic and people are going to like it, but like, you're still Misery Signals. Like, you're incapable of being a pop band. And so like, they don't really try that either. But it's so hard to put a nail on it because it's a record that's just okay. There's nothing wrong with it objectively. It's not the Misery Signals I signed up for.
I think one of the nice things about doing a podcast, or that there are podcasts out there now, but I will speak sort of to, and this sounds a little self-congratulatory, but, you know, having gotten to talk to Greg Thomas, who worked on this record, produced this record, you know, something, you know, when we were kind of talking a little bit about the band, at the time it was cut out of the episode because it wasn't anything that's going to be said. So I'll switch it to, very recently Carl just posted, because it's the 10-year anniversary of Controller at this point.
Yeah.
And so Carl posted this long thing on all of his socials, if you saw it, basically stating his involvement in the band, making that record, and just a lot of things leading up to his time in the band coming to an end around the time of Absent Light, because basically they did the record, did a very light touring, and then went away again. And the thing is, something about this record that I always kind of wondered, and you know, it's been confirmed at this point, obviously, but this just feels like a disjointed record. I didn't know how much of it was, you know, you're trying to bring in a new songwriter in Greg, who hasn't been with the band as long as Stu had been writing songs from the get-go. You don't have that same sense of, it doesn't seem like it has that same sense of like cohesion, like, you know, you were saying, Dan. And, you know, as Carl kind of ended up admitting, he didn't write a lot of the lyrics on this. You know, he basically had nothing, didn't bring anything, and Ryan and Greg ended up writing a lot of the lyrics for this. So I think just as a whole, like, you know, you're saying like, it doesn't not feel like a Misery Signals record, but it doesn't have that Misery Signals stamp. And it's like, I think there was too much change happening for one record under the circumstances also of it being a crowdfunded record. So there's probably more demand to put out a quality product that's going to appeal to your fans, because they're literally the ones funding it. And to me, I think a lot of that struggle that the band was facing, you know, from losing a couple of members, from losing, you know, not having an interested Carl, you know, writing vocals and so forth. I mean, we just praise Controller for all the things that it was. And I think that's the problem, is very much like how Of Malice and the Magnum Heart was so great that by comparison, when you look at Mirrors, it doesn't quite live up to it. But when you go to Controller to Absent Light, it just doesn't stack up. And I think that's always kind of been the downfall of this band. You have 4 records, which I would say their worst is better than most people's best.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a good record, but it's just not Misery Signals. And again, I think it's impossible when your last record was essentially a perfect record.
Yeah.
If I gave you this record tomorrow and didn't tell you what it was, how long would it take for you to suspect this was a new album by Misery Signals?
Based on the guitar playing, because Ryan and both the Brandon and Ryan both have a very them sound, whether it be guitar and or drum playing, I would have figured it out pretty quickly. That being said, I would have been like, these must be demos or something, like these aren't finished products.
Yeah, and the production quality isn't as good as we've had prior. And you know, I realized it was mostly just like self-produced. Mm-hmm. So I mean, from that perspective, it sounds fine. But it's like, your last record was produced by Devin Townsend.
Production can be a detriment to any band, especially when you've crowdfunded and are releasing an album essentially independently.
Joe, something I kind of wondered with this, this band spans from 2004 to 2013, a very interesting cross-section of production styles within this genre. You going through these 4 records, what did you notice? Like, did you notice any trend hopping between the production styles or anything?
They followed metalcore tropes. They had a triggered bass drum early on, and then later on that didn't happen. The first record, all the vocals are doubled, but they're doubled left and right. That is a pet peeve of mine. Usually that's done for background vocals or additional vocals to give the soundscape some depth. Devin Townsend has a very specific style and approach when it comes to metal. He reminds me of Phil Spector in some of the records he's been involved in. He tries to make it sound big, but not by doubling or tripling parts, by just turning everything up really, really loud. Beyond that, it started to sound more and more like generic metalcore the longer it went. Whereas before, it reminded me more of chaotic hardcore.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna just defer to him on that because I don't hear that stuff. I hear the music, the passion. That's all I hear. Or
from
lack
album
thereof.
1 to album 4, you've got more and more generic elements, and that's interesting for a band like this, like you said, that doesn't get credit.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I think we've reached it. John, final thoughts on Misery Signals?
Misery Signals is one of those bands that I already said it. They're a band's band. I think if you are a fan of any of the subgenres within the heavy, aggressive, hardcore, post-hardcore, metalcore, whatever tag you want to put on it, there's a little bit of something here for everybody, whether it be the melody, whether it be the musicianship, whether it be the impassioned vocals from Jesse or from Carl. There's probably going to be something on every album that draws you to that record, which is more than I can say for a lot of bands of this genre. And if you don't like Controller, I would be very surprised. But I think this is a band, like all the guys got back together. The original band is back together. And I believe we will have some new music probably the first of the new year, I believe. So I'm very interested to see where Jesse picks back up from a 13-year absence.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the same thing about Killswitch. Be interesting to see. Although Jesse had done multiple projects prior to that, but so I kind of knew he was still going to sound great. But yeah,
Right.
I guess for me with Misery Signals, they're just a band that definitely has not gotten their due. And that's just what sucks about being innovative. It's the same thing about Zayo. It's the same idea. You've got these bands that are great, and when people hear them for the first time, they're like, wow, this is really good. Why isn't this band more popular? It's always the first question. Why isn't this more popular? Because a bunch of other bands did what they did, but added a whole bunch of pop elements to it to make it more digestible for general audiences. And
just on a bigger label.
Yeah, they were on a bigger label. They had a better production team. It's like it's like gambling, man. You really never know where you're going to end up, but most of the time you're going to end up in the gutter. You know what I mean? There's a chance that you might reach really great success, but for the most part, the most success you're going to really get in a band like this, for the mostly is you're going to be able to launch a successful crowdfunding campaign, and that's about as close to made it as you can be in this particular music scene.
Misery Signals is not a band that's been on my radar, but when I listen to them, I hear elements that other bands got credit for. I also hear things that are not enjoyable to the majority of listeners. You've got 4 albums that span different elements of metalcore, so the whole thing doesn't just sound like this As I Lay Dying, Killswitch Engage ripoff. I'm going to say listen to Controller, and then work your way backwards. I have the least positive things to say about Absent Light, but if you're a fan of the band, you should listen to all of it, because there's only 4 records.
We'll have to do a revisit next year.
There you go. Yeah, that's definitely going to be a Patreon episode for sure.
John, what's your album of the week?
Well, in light of my prepping for this interview I'm doing later today, I have been listening to Continent because I'm going to see the 10-year anniversary show of that tonight by the Acacia Strain.
Dan, what about you?
I'm going to go with Mind Warp by the band Brainchild.
So you mean Brainchild by Circle of Dust, right?
No, I mean Mind Warp by Brainchild.
Long live the Chariot. Real quick, Dan, we had a tweet from AC, Alt1, in regards to episode 81, Glassjaw.
Oh, the one that me and Alfonso did? Not the one that you did?
I mean, I was there, but nobody wanted to talk to me.
Nah.
I would have included you.
This was a great episode. I was never the biggest Glassjaw fan, but the passion for this band from you guys was off the chart. Such love and appreciation from Alfonso and Dan. Hey, I was there too.
Sure you were. And we didn't want John to be on that episode because he doesn't like the first album, and he's wrong.
100% wrong.
He's wrong about that album. He's wrong about Life is Peachy by Korn.
He's been wrong about that since day one.
The dude's out of control. You got to be really careful, when you're bringing him on, because he might start throwing that stuff out.
Well, I'll just chalk that up to me being a few years older than you and wiser. I have a wisdom behind these eyes.
The older you are, the more likely you are to be seen on.
I'm going to go ahead and say this, too. Results may vary is not a bad record either.
Oh, boy. Okay, well, with...
Go ahead, Dan.
This is not over, but it is over for today.
And on that note, this has been episode 83 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion, and please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks.
Yeah, give us your money.
Listen to Jons Untitled podcast after listening to Discography Discussion every week. Do it!
Twice!
Yeah, 2 times, really.